Organs Without Bodies. Deleuze Without Consequences. By Slavoj Zizek. Microfascisms. The inverted mirror image or counterpart of this ambiguity of the Deleuzian attitude toward capitalism is the ambiguity of Deleuze's theory of fascism, a theory whose basic insight is that fascism does not take hold of subjects at the level of ideology, interests, and so forth, but takes hold directly at the level of bodily investments, libidinal gestures, and so on. Fascism enacts a certain assemblage of bodies, so one should fight it, also, at this level, with impersonal counter-strategies. At the same time, there is the opposition of micro and macro molecular and molar. Fascism is a life-denying view, a view of renunciation, of the sacrificial subordination to higher goals. It relies on impersonal micro-strategies, manipulations of intensities, which work as life-denying. Here, however, things get complicated. Is the fascist renunciation not in the best Deleuzian way a deceiving mask, a lure to distract us from the positivity of fascism's actual ideological functioning, which is one of superego obscene enjoyment? In short, is fascism not playing the old hypocritical game of a fake sacrifice here, of the superficial renunciation of enjoyment destined to deceive the big other, to conceal from it the fact that we do enjoy, and enjoy even excessively? God demands constant enjoyment, as the normal mode of existence for souls within the order of the world. It is my duty to provide him with it. Do these words of Daniel Paul Schreiber not supply the best description of the superego in its extreme psychotic dimension? Deleuze's account of fascism is that, although subjects as individuals can rationally perceive that it is against their interests to follow it, it seizes them precisely at the impersonal level of pure intensities, abstract bodily motions, libidinally invested collective rhythmic movements, affects of hatred and passion that cannot be attributed to any determinate individual. It is thus the impersonal level of pure affects that sustains fascism, not the level of represented and constituted reality. Perhaps the ultimate example here is provided by The Sound of Music, an anti-fascist film, as to its official storyline, whose texture of intensities generates the opposite message. That is to say, through closer examination, it becomes evident that the Austrians resisting the Nazi invasion are presented as good fascists, displaying their rootedness in the local patriarchal life world, enjoying the stupidity of the yodeling culture, etc., while the film's portrait of the Nazis uncannily echoes the Nazi portrait of the Jews, uprooted political manipulators striving for global power. The struggle against fascism should be fought at this impersonal level of intensities, not only at the level of rational critique by undermining the fascist libidinal economy with a more radical one. Really existing socialism is often designated as a system that functioned because it did not function. Incidentally, this is also an elegantly simple definition of the Freudian symptom: the system survived precisely through the exceptions violating its explicit rules, the black market, etc. In short, what the regime perceived as a threat effectively enabled it to survive, which is why all big campaigns against the illegal economy, corruption, alcoholism, and so forth, were self-defeating. The system was undermining its own conditions of existence. And, does the same not go for every ideology that also has to rely on a set of unwritten rules violating its explicit rules? Today, one often evokes the market of ideas. To assert themselves, new ideas have to be tested in the market like competition of free discussion. Could one not say that this market of ideas is also necessarily accompanied by the black market of ideas, swarms of disavowed, obscene sexist and racist ideas, and other such ideas of a similar nature, that an ideological edifice has to rely on if it is to remain efficient? In November 2002, George Bush came under attack by the right-wing members of his own party for what was perceived as too soft a stance on Islam. Like Netanyahu and other hardliners, he was reproached for repeating the mantra that terrorism has nothing to do with Islam, this great and tolerant religion. As a column in the Wall Street Journal put it, the true enemy of the United States is not terrorism but militant Islam. The idea of these critics is that one should gather the courage and proclaim the politically incorrect, but, nonetheless, obvious, fact that there is a deep strain of violence and intolerance in Islam that, To put it bluntly, something in Islam resists the acceptance of the liberal capitalist world order. It is here that a truly radical analysis should break with the standard liberal attitude. No, one should not defend Bush here. His attitude is ultimately no better than that of Cohen, Buchanan, Pat Robertson, and other anti-Islamists. Both sides of this coin are equally wrong. It is against this background that one should approach Oriana Fallacies, The Rage and the Pride, this passionate defense of the West against the Muslim threat, this open assertion of the superiority of the West, this denigration of Islam not even as a different culture but as barbarism, entailing that we are not even dealing with a clash of cultures but with a clash of our culture and Muslim barbarism. The book is stricto sensu the obverse of politically correct tolerance. Its lively passion is the truth of lifeless PC tolerance. Recall the immigrant-bashing skinhead who, when interviewed, sneers back at the journalist and provides him with a perfect social psychologist's explanation of his own misdeeds, lack of paternal authority and maternal care, the crisis of values in our society, etc., and whose unsurpassable model is still the song Officer Krupke from Leonard Bernstein's West Side Story. This figure cannot simply be dismissed as the supreme case of cynical reason, as the embodiment of the actual functioning of today's ideology. Since he speaks from the position of the explanandum, his remarks also effectively denounce the fakeness and falsity of the way the ruling ideology and its knowledge account for his acts. This is what you think I am, this is how, in your learned interventions and reports, you will characterize and dismiss me, but you see, I can also play that game, and it doesn't touch me at all. Is this not an act of denouncing the hidden cynicism of the humanist all-understanding social workers and psychologists themselves? What if they are the true cynics in this affair? Another example of the same tension, in October 2002, Washington, D.C., was in the grip of a panic. An unknown sniper shot a dozen, randomly selected, individuals in less than 2 weeks, thereby mimicking cinema examples like the one from Louis Buñuel's The Phantom of Freedom, in which a guy goes to the top of a Paris skyscraper and shoots unsuspecting pedestrians. One could make a wager that there will soon be a video game allowing the player to assume the role of the sniper. Why? Although the sniper's acts were reinscribed into the field of terrorism, even with hints that Al-Qaeda may have been directly behind them, the subjective logic of his acts is exclusively late capitalist, the lone psychopathic individual, a social but well-disciplined and perfectly trained, with a grudge against society. The proposed video game, which would rely on the player's identification with the sniper, thus articulates a fundamental feature of today's subjectivity, the rise of the asocial, solipsist individual. Again, the excluded outsider is unmasked as the hidden model of the normal insider. Two important, interconnected conclusions are to be drawn from such Deleuzian analyses. First, there is the limitation plaguing attempts to undermine the hold of any ideological edifice by means of reference to facts, that is, by rendering all the hidden data public. According to Deleuze, Silberberg's powerful idea in his Hitler, a film from Germany, is that no information, whatever it might be, is sufficient to defeat Hitler. All the documents could be known, all the testimonies could be heard, but in vain. This serves as a profound insight against people like Chomsky, whose wager is precisely the opposite one only needs to be told all the facts. The second, complementary conclusion is that the struggle for liberation is not reducible to a struggle for the right to narrate, to the struggle of deprived marginal groups to freely articulate their position, or, as Deleuze puts it when answering an interviewer's question, you are asking if societies of control and information will not give rise to forms of resistance capable of again giving a chance to communism conceived as a transversal organization of free individuals. I don't know, perhaps. But this will not be insofar as minorities will be able to acquire speech. Perhaps, speech and communication are rotten. To create was always something else than to communicate. And yet, productive as this Deleuzian approach is, it is time to problematize it, and, with it, the general tendency popular among, especially Western, Marxists and post-Marxists of relying on a set of simplistic clues for the triumph of fascism, or, nowadays, for the crisis of the left, as if the result would have been entirely different if only the left were to fight fascism at the level of libidinal micropolitics, or, today, if only the left were to abandon class essentialism and accept the multitude of post-political struggles as the proper terrain of its activity. If ever there was the case of the leftist arrogant intellectual stupidity, this is the one. There are two problems with Deleuze and Guattari's theory of fascism. The notion that fascism could have been defeated earlier if only the left would have countered it with its own politics of passions, an old idea defended already by Ernst Bloch and Wilhelm Reich, seems naive enough. Furthermore, was what Deleuze proposes as his big insight not, albeit in a different mode, claimed already by the most traditional Marxism, which often repeated that fascists disdain rational argumentation and play on people's base irrational instincts? More generally, this Deleuzian approach is all too abstract. All bad politics is declared fascist, so that fascism is elevated into a global container, a catch-all, an all-encompassing term for everything that opposes the free flow of becoming. It is inseparable from a proliferation of molecular focuses in interaction, which skip from point to point, before beginning to resonate together in the National Socialist state. Rural fascism and city or neighborhood fascism, youth fascism and war veterans fascism, fascism of the left and fascism of the right, fascism of the couple, family, school, and office. One is almost tempted to add the following, and the fascism of the irrationalist vitalism of Deleuze himself. In an early polemic, Badiou effectively accused Deleuze of harboring fascist tendencies. Deleuze and Guattari, especially Guattari, often indulge here in a true interpretive delirium of hasty generalizations. In one great arc, they draw the line of continuity from the early Christian procedure of confessions through the self-probing of romantic subjectivity and the psychoanalytic treatment, confessing one's secret, perverse desires, up to the forced confessions of the Stalinist show trials. Guattari once directly characterized these trials as an exercise in collective psychoanalysis, to which one is tempted to respond by pointing out how the Stalinist trials were evidently productive. Their actual goal was not to discover the truth but to create new truth, to construct/generate it. It is here, against such generalizations, that one should evoke the lesson of Lacan's notion of hegemonic articulation. Fascism emerges only when the disperse elements start to resonate together. In fact, it is only a specific mode of this resonance of elements, elements that can also be inserted into totally different hegemonic chains of articulation. At this precise point, one should also emphasize the problematic nature of Deleuze's sympathy for Wilhelm Reich. Is not Reich's thesis on the nuclear bourgeois family as the elementary cell generating the fascist authoritarian personality blatantly wrong, as it was demonstrated already by the analyses of Adorno and Horkheimer in the 1930s?